All right, I think right back here, we're doing pretty well on time today. So 11 o'clock, my plan is to break at noon for lunch, come back at 1, and keep on trucking from there. So we're gonna keep rolling. Any other questions or something you went to the bathroom and, oh, you know what I forgot to ask? Or anything online, Matt? Anybody?
No, we're looking good.
All right, good. I must be one heck of an effective instructor. I have no questions. That's what I'm going to go with anyway. Just let me believe the dream. All right, cool stuff. Attackers and fun things. Okay, different types of hackers. Okay, we alluded to this earlier. Talk about white hat, black hat, gray hat. There's a big conference called Black Hat, right? Anybody have been to Black Hat before? I still never been there, but I do know that if I ever go, turn off all Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and everything like that, because they will mess with you. And then white hat security. So how would you, I know gray hat's kind of in the middle, but give me an example if you can. Like black hat, you say, okay, that's a hacker. They're just trying to get profit or whatever they're trying to do. They're a bad person. White hat, okay, they work for a company. They're getting hired to do this. That's fine. I get it. But where does gray come in? Give me an example of what you think a gray hat hacker might be. Sometimes there are people out there who will identify a vulnerability, create a threat to exploit the vulnerability, have a proof of concept, and then go to the company whose software they're hacking and try to exploit them, right? And say, okay, you know what? I've got this, here's the proof, and if you don't pay me X amount of dollars, I'm going to release this, and basically it's going to be a 0 day, and we're going to have problems. So that's kind of that middle area. It's not a really nice thing to do. And other people, though, will find that, and then they will report it. What you're supposed to do is find the weakness, identify it, and maybe even create a threat if you want to, but then report it to the company and give them a certain amount of time to fix it. I read something recently, I think within the last 3 weeks, there was an article, I don't remember the details now, but a guy had gone to a company, he had found a weakness, he knew how to exploit it, he went to the company and said, you guys have a problem, was very specific with them. They kind of blew him off, and this went on for months on end. And finally, he's like, all right, F you guys. And he showed up at one of their, like a conference or something, and then totally like released it like at the conference, and it blew up. It was a big, ugly thing. It was an interesting story, but yeah, not a nice thing to do. But there are kind of ways you're supposed to do that the right way. So attacker qualities, I don't know, I'm not a big fan of this slide, to be perfectly honest. It kind of seems like duh to me, but right, they have different intents or motive, right, depending if you want to use a legal term. Sophistication. Do you think that hackers are getting more or less sophisticated over time?
Less.
Why would you say less? Do you think there are more script kiddies now or more nation states playing in the hacker community? So have you ever heard the term script kiddie? What is a script kiddie? Anyone? A script kiddie is just exactly that. It's a young person, typically it's a kid who can run a script, but they don't know how shit works. They just run it and they know it blows something up. So they're hacking into stuff doing that, as opposed to somebody who's advanced, like a nation state like China or something like that. Or us, we do it too, right? We're guilty too. So there's different levels of sophistication, but over time, people are becoming more and more sophisticated. And then the other thing you've got this weird kind of opposite vector thing going on. You've got sophistication of attackers is going up, but at the same time, the level of sophistication needed to pull off some stuff is going down because of the automated tools, right? So you've got really, really good tools and people who know what they're doing, and it's a recipe for disaster. So resources, yeah, you think about nation states, and whether it's the US or China or anybody else, the amount of resources they have available to them is phenomenal. Money is no object. I always say that at my house. I'm like, yeah, money's no object, because when you have none, it's no object. But it's a little bit of a different meaning here. Location, some attacks, it says, require physical proximity. That's true. Some of them don't. You can do them remotely. We'll talk a little bit about that later. And then target information, right? How much do you know about the entity that you're targeting? Well, how much recon have you done? There's all kinds of things to think about there. But like I said, this slide's kind of a duh slide. Now here you go. Here's script kiddies. Unskilled hackers. Yep, they can run a script. Good job. Double click. Hacktivists, I like that because that's my name too. I think like, oh, hacktivist. That's all the political stuff, like maybe PETA or somebody like that, somebody who's got a cause that they're hacking for. Anonymous does that. You guys have heard of Anonymous? Maybe that. Organized crime. Yeah, I heard a stat recently, and I don't remember the numbers, but that I want to say that organized crime or like hacking crime, things related to that, for the first time in our history last year, surpassed drug trade. Like it was some insane number of billions of dollars, but the drug trade used to be worth X number of billions of dollars. Hacking finally went more. It was crazy. Competitors, yeah. So corporate espionage, that stuff happens all the time. Insiders are always a threat. There's your APT and nation states, right? Anybody remember the name of the attack that we launched against Iran's nuclear system? Yeah, and it worked. It was fabulous. Stuxnet. Anybody remember that name? Look that one up if you just want to read about a cool attack. Stuxnet, Stuxnet, I believe. Essentially what we did was, I say we, the Americans, because we did it, wrote a virus and managed to get it inside of Iran's nuclear facility. And that virus, what it did was it reported to all of the consoles that were monitoring the uranium stuff. Everything's good. Meanwhile, everything was melting down and just completely hosed their system, but it looked like everything. So that's that false negative, right? It says, hey, everything's fine. No, it's not. That was a good one. Yes. Okay, that was quick. All right, let's see if you can answer this. Limited sophistication. Good job. I didn't say this one directly, but I can give you an example.
Nations?
Yeah, nation states. Yeah, do you guys remember that? Well, I'm sure you do, with the whole, oh my God, why am I forgetting now? It was government related with the whole Chinese thing and one of the big departments that got hacked recently a few years ago and all that information. You guys started getting letters like, hey, your information has been compromised. It wasn't the VA though.
OPM?
Yeah, Office of Personnel Management, OPM. Yeah.
Oh, we've been hacked so many times.
Cyber terrorists, this is really kind of political causes.
Activists.
That's right. All right. Pretty easy section. Quick and dirty. Social engineering. I love this stuff. This social engineering is, I just think, really fascinating because it deals so much with psychology of people, right? So it says principles. These are the ways that people trick other people into doing stuff they shouldn't do, right? Authority, right? Hey, I'm the CEO, blah, blah, blah. Oh shit, it's the CEO. I better do this thing and click on that. That's one example. Intimidation, and you get that stuff. I saw something in my spam filter recently that was like, in the English, the grammar was god-awful, but it was basically telling me that they owned my system and they got off all these, incriminating pictures and videos, and they're going to send it to everybody and whatever. I'm like, knock yourself out, dude. Have a
You
good
read
time.
your spam email?
No,
Spam.
I normally don't, but every once in a while I see something that looks exciting, so yeah. I don't click in it, I just look at it. But in the preview window. Consensus, social proof, don't worry about that. Scarcity, hey, last minute, click now, don't lose out. Urgency, got to do it. Familiarity and liking, that's easy to do with people sometimes, especially if you know that maybe they give to a specific charity or they're part of an organization and you want to say, oh yeah, I'm part of that organization, here's what we're doing. It's very easy. People all of a sudden, they feel that sense of community and trust and they let their guard down. I actually got hit, the best of us do. I got hit with an attack one time, and it's because I broke one of my cardinal rules. One of my cardinal rules is never do anything of real importance on my phone. And mainly because of the real estate. It's a visual thing for me. So I had called my insurance company for whatever reason, and then about 3 days later, I got this email, supposedly from the insurance company, saying, hey, log in here and do X, Y, and Z. And I had just talked to them a few days before, so I was like, oh, that's weird. And I normally know to look for certain things and check the padlock for SSL and, et cetera. I know the things to do, but I was kind of already in that mindset. I was like, oh, okay. And I clicked on it, and then I was like, and then I put in my username and password, and as soon as I did, I'm like, that was really dumb. I shouldn't have done it from there. I should have just gone to the website directly instead of through the link. So I knew what I did as soon as I did it. And I'm like, damn it. So I immediately logged out. Not that it matters. They already had my credentials. And then I went to my computer, logged into the website directly, changed both my username and password immediately, and then called my insurance company and said, hey, letting you know this happened, and described it for them. They said, yeah, they said, well, you're not the first to do that. You are the first to actually go through and immediately change your username and password. Good job. Thanks. You think I'd know better. So sometimes that trust and familiarity can be problematic. That's what people rely on for social engineering attacks. All right, who wants to describe what phishing is?
Email.
Okay, tell me a little bit more. Describe for me what it...
An email that goes out to you to get you to basically provide your information to them. They're looking for information, they send you an email.
Yep, and you have to click on a link, right? Just kind of like what I did, something similar to this, right? Click on that, and then it takes you to some fake website. And in the beginning, when phishing wasn't a very sophisticated attack, you would see like the web page would have like Cyrillic letters. You're like, okay, Russian guy, I know what you're up to, right? I get it. But they've become quite sophisticated. So the phishing attacks, as a matter of fact, there was an attack a few years ago on a company. Well, it ended up, if you remember, there was an RSA. Do you guys remember there was like a time when they had to reissue a bunch of tokens from RSA? If you remember the RSA tokens, part of the reason they had to do that was because they were worried that they were compromised. They did have somebody who got in, and the way they got in was through some admin or something clicking on a link inside of an email. That's the difficult thing. It only takes one person to compromise the security of the entire company just from that. So that's phishing. And there are different types of phishing. Okay? Spear phishing is when you are targeting a specific person or group of people. Like maybe it's admins or, I don't know, it could be anybody. That's spear phishing. It's a directed, targeted attack. Whereas whaling is when you're going for the big cheese. It says single out high profile targets. Think CEOs is a good example. That would be whaling, going for a CEO. And then vishing, I got one of those one time. It's a voicemail phishing. And you end up getting, I got a recording and it said, hi, we're calling from X, Y, and Z company. Please call us back and deal with this issue or whatever. And then you call it back and it says, so we can authenticate you. Please type in your social security number and hit pound. I'm like, F you, I'm stupid, but I'm not that stupid. So that's a voicemail phishing. Vishing. It's a good one. My favorite are, have you guys ever gotten the calls at home from Microsoft? Oh, how's that? Oh, this is Microsoft security. We noticed that there's a problem on your with your Windows box, and if you don't do this thing now, we're going to have to cut off your access to the internet and all that. Yes. I love those things. I put them on speaker. I get my whole family around, bring the kids, and we F with those people so badly. It is so much fun. I keep them on the phone for like an hour because I got time to kill. What do I care? And the whole time I'm like, I remember one time I got him going for a long time and never told him that I was on a Mac. I'm like, I don't see a window. What do you mean a Windows key? And then I convinced him that, that it was my son's computer and he'd been looking at pornography and, oh my God, what is this? And could the hackers, I just had so much fun with them. So if you ever get bored, it's a good time. What's that?
It really is fun.
Yeah, it is. It's a good time. I actually had a weird one recently. They called me and left a message. It was one of those things where you pick up and it's a recording. And I wanted to click the button to go ahead and connect me to the idiot that I want to mess with for a while. And it wouldn't do it. It just kind of ended up hanging up on me. And then it left a number, and I called the number, and the number didn't connect. I was really disappointed, but I tried. Shoulder surfing, that happens all the time. Tailgating and piggybacking, there's a slight nuance here. I don't think you need to know it for the test, but I'll tell you for real life. Piggybacking is when you have somebody that you know, like you're piggybacking and you're bringing them in with you, but they haven't authenticated. Tailgating is when somebody goes in ahead of you and they don't know you're coming, and then you sneak in behind them. So there's a little bit of a difference. Piggybacking is when it's willful, and tailgating is when you don't know it's happening. But it doesn't matter. They're both kind of the same, similar area. Dumpster diving, that's good stuff. Still happens. You can find all kinds of neat stuff in trash. So how do you defend against this stuff? Well, the most important thing is training, right? User training. And I make a little bit of a distinction between what I call awareness versus training versus education. Now, you don't need to know this for the test, but I want you to understand it because, again, it's a thinking thing. Awareness, training, education. Here's the difference. If I were to tell you that it's possible for you to receive an email, and inside that email there will be a link, and if you click on that link, it will take you to a fake website, ask for your credentials, and you could give up your credentials. You would say, okay, what's that called? I say, that's called phishing. Now, what I just did there, was that training? I didn't train you anything. I made you aware. That's awareness. There is only one goal of training. I don't care what the training is. There's only one goal, and that is to effect a behavior change. Either start a behavior, stop a behavior, or modify a current behavior. That's it. Those are the only three choices. So in that first example, I did not train you anything. I made you aware. Now, if I said to you, if I followed up and I said, now, if you receive an email that you suspect of being a phishing attack, I don't want you to click on anything. I want you to instead, I want you to click forward, put it securityteam@mycompany.com, and email us the email, and we'll take care of it. That's training, because now I've given you a behavior to follow. And the education part is when I make you paranoid. If I can make it so that you're paranoid that everything that comes in that you don't recognize, you're like, oh, wait a minute. I don't know this person. I wasn't expecting this email. Not sure what this is. That makes me a little bit paranoid. That's education. So those are the differences. But user training is the best thing you can do, right? Yeah, don't share passwords. I shouldn't have to tell you that. And I tell my family all the time, I'm not giving you my PIN. Policies we've talked about. What kind of control is a policy? Administrative control. Very good. Least privilege we talked about. All these other things kind of make sense. There's nothing interesting here. Oh, there's a good one. Technical controls. So anybody know what a man trap is? Besides marriage, but you know. Thank you, I'll be here all week. Tip your waiters and waitresses. What is a man trap?
Is that like 2 doors or whatever?
Yeah, you have to dual authenticate. That's right.
One door, maybe your son.
That's right. So you authenticate into one door, you walk in, you shut that door behind you. Now there's typically some type of inspection done on you, whether it's visual or something else, and then you have to be authenticated through the next door, and then you go through. That's a man trap. I still think marriage is funnier, though. You guys are a tough crowd. All right. Good job. Yeah, I don't think I even they didn't put true up here for some reason, but yes.
C3. Yeah, shoulders.
Yeah, the first one.
Whoa.
This one's true. It doesn't say it on there. I didn't type it in, but this one's true, right? Some kind of impersonation, right? Make you think I'm something I'm not. Wow, you read fast. Yeah. Yep, good job.
Security guard.
Yeah. Yeah. What kind of control are security guards? Are they administrative, technical, or physical? And part B, are they preventive, detective, deterrent? What are they?
Security guards are physical, and they'd be a deterrent, physical deterrent.
Yeah, it'd be a deterrent, yeah. And they can be, of course, detective as well, because they can see something like a camera would see something. And yes, technically, could they prevent something? They could, but we don't really classify them as preventive. Yeah, exactly.
He's got a flashlight. I might not want to. I'm gonna go with false. Yeah, false.
All right. Now we get into malware. Somebody had asked about malware before. Okay. Oh, there's some fun stuff in here. I love this section. Okay. Who can tell me the difference, the basic difference, between a virus and a worm?
Virus does some sort of control or damage to your computer, where a worm is just somebody that records or watches the spread more.
No.
I think a worm self-replicating.
Okay, say it louder.
A worm is self-replicating.
So he said a worm is self-replicating. What does that mean that is required for a virus to actually work?
You have to execute.
That's right. There's human interaction, right? A worm will propagate on its own, right? If you think about the real world, think about a worm like in the ground, right? A real worm can make baby worms, right? But a virus in the real world needs a human host and then to sneeze and then sneeze on somebody else and they get the virus, whatever. It needs some kind of an interaction. And I remember, because I'm old enough to remember this, does anybody remember the name Anna Kournikova? So very famous tennis player, happened to be, by pretty much most people's standards, a very attractive person. And there was something called the I love you virus that came out. And basically what it was, it said, hey, click on this thing. It's a picture of Anna Kournikova in the nude. You know what? A lot of people are going to click on that. And that's exactly what happened. And that virus went everywhere pretty quickly, right? We didn't have the term broke the internet back then, but I'm sure it did. So a virus requires user interaction. A worm does not. There was a SQL Slammer worm, was a worm from a long time ago. But the thing about it is it spread, and I don't remember the exact number, but this thing spread across the internet and infected quite literally millions upon millions of systems in a matter of like 7 minutes. And it was based on an interesting vulnerability because it was SQL Slammer. It took advantage of structured query language, of a SQL engine that most people are like, wait a minute, I'm not running any kind of a database. But it had people who were running like Microsoft Visio and things like that. There were some SQL elements to it that were, in there, and this thing went and spread, went through all the, it was literally like 7 minutes. You can go look it up. It's a pretty interesting worm. Trojan horse, one of my absolute favorites. I just love the idea of this thing. How many people, by a show of hands, have seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail? 1, 2? Oh my
Amazing
God.
movie.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more movie. If you haven't seen it, you must leave class now and watch it, and you cannot return until you're done. Office Space. Have you seen Office Space? Okay.
I've never seen that.
Oh, Lord. Get out. Great film. But anyway, the Trojan horse, who remembers from history? Can you tell me what the Trojan horse was? Go ahead.
When the Greece attacked Troy, they battled for like 5 years. They run out of food, plague struck, so they took a bunch of ships that were broken, built a giant wooden horse, hollowed it out, put their best elite team in there, and offered it to the Trojans. Then they pretended to leave. When the Trojans brought in the city, they came out at night, killed the guards, opened the gates, let them in.
Right. So the idea of it is that a Trojan horse is something that looks benign, but carries a malicious payload. And that's exactly what you just described. So what they did was the Greeks knew that the Trojans love horses. We're going to build them a big-ass horse, man. Who wouldn't want this?
The Trojans worship Poseidon. Poseidon's animal is the horse, so they had effigies of horses.
There you go. Yeah, right, that's about where my level is. You clearly know more about this than I do. But the point is, I knew they liked horses. And so the idea was, we're going to go ahead and we're going to build them a giant horse, and we're going to hide people in it. And then they leave it parked outside the gate. Hey guys, just saying, we want a truce. We don't want to fight anymore. We're leaving now. Bye. And they go away, and then the Trojans are like, oh wow, oh what a nice thing. What a nice thing that they did. Let's go ahead and bring this in, and we'll party now. The war is over, and then they all get slaughtered. So a Trojan horse in the computer world is the exact same thing. It is a program that appears to be benign but carries a malicious payload. And the way they create them is they have special programs. I don't remember the official name of them. I keep wanting to say a binding program. I think it is a binding program. But basically, let's say you have a malicious program called passwordstealer.exe. And then you have a benign program called calculator.exe. What it does is it puts these together in such a way that it essentially hides one behind the other. So the calc one would be in the front, the malicious one's in the back, so somebody looking at it can't tell. And you say, hey man, check out this I know you went to Florida State, go Noles, and I know you check out this calculator, it's a Florida State calculator, you really like it. Okay, great. I double click on it, and sure enough, it opens up, it plays the fight song, and I can use the calculator, and that's great. But in the background, it also opened up passwordstealer.exe, and now it's stealing my passwords as I do stuff. That's the idea behind a Trojan horse. Logic bomb. Oh my God. I'm not an evil person, but if I were, this would be so the way I would go. Logic bomb is when you basically set something up on a timer to go off and screw people over once you're gone. So, when you go to leave a company, you're like, these guys suck, I hate them, they made my life miserable. About 6 months from now, after I'm long gone, this whole thing's going to blow up and they're going to lose their customer database. That kind of stuff. Not nice, but definitely effective. Watering hole. It's funny, you don't hear that term very often. It says infection on a trusted site or service. It's basically, a watering hole is someplace where a lot of people normally gather, right? And so if you know where that site is, you infect it. People go there all the time and they get infected. What was that one? The movies? Yeah, good one. Damn, I do that. Am I getting nailed every time I do that? Probably. A convenience fee, too. Malware payloads, backdoor. Okay, we talked about this. In a backdoor, if you're a hacker and you're doing pen testing of any kind, what are you trying to establish when you insert a backdoor? It's a P word that we learned. Persistence. Yeah. Papa, sorry. So backdoor is for persistence. Botnet, oh, that's good stuff, man. So botnets crack me up. So I'm not telling you to do this because it's illegal, don't do it. But it's possible to rent botnets. You can go on the internet and rent botnets. Now botnet is nothing more than a bunch of computers that would be under your control for you to launch an attack against somebody. A lot of people do this using what's called a DOS or DDoS attack. What does that stand for?
Denial of service.
Denial of service and distributed denial of service. That's correct. So what they'll do is they'll say, look, I hate this company. I want to bring them down because I know if I bring down their website, they're going to lose $1 million a minute. And I'm going to go ahead and go out and I'm going to rent this botnet of 10,000 computers. I'm going to pay for it so I have access over this amount of time, and I'm going to launch an attack. So you can do it. It's illegal, and there's probably a Fed on the other side who's going to bust you, but it is perfectly possible. That's the idea of botnets with zombie computers and fun stuff like that. Ransomware, boy, is that getting a lot of play. What country is oftentimes associated with ransomware? Say it again? Russia, yeah. So we have certain countries we know that are famous for stuff, right? If we think about trying to steal military secrets, who usually does that from us, trying to steal from us? China, good one. You think, things like ransomware and all that, you think Russia, right? Some people have their specialties. Ransomware, again, one of those things where, oh, guess what? I just got into your computer. My program found everything that ends in .xls, .docs, .pdf, blah, 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 and it just encrypted everything. If you want access to your crap, you're going to give me $500 in Bitcoin now. It used to be you could just pay with real money. Now you got to actually pay in Bitcoin. So that's pretty common now. Ransomware is ugly. There were a couple big organizations hit with this a couple years ago. Hospitals. Man, I'll tell you what, that causes some problems. Spyware, of course, secretly recording user activity. Adware is just a pain in the ass. Bloatware, whatever you want to call it. Hidden malware. Ooh, okay. What is a polymorphic, it says malware, but polymorphic virus? It's a particular type of virus, actually.
I'm assuming it's changing.
Yeah, it's basically, it creates variants on its own. So how do most viruses get stopped? What kind of defense do we use? Yeah, antivirus, but how does it work? Based on what? I'll give you a hint.
The known code.
What's that called?
The signature.
It's a signature, right? So if you have a virus, we'll call it virus alpha, and you know that virus alpha looks like this, all you have to do is monitor when you see something like that, it's virus alpha, and you stop it. That's fine. But what if all of a sudden you have a virus that comes through, you say, oh, I know what that is, it looks like this, and all of a sudden it changes itself into something different, and you're like, oh shit, I don't have a signature for that. That's polymorphic, right? Many shapes, and that's the problem with polymorphic viruses in particular. Stealth malware, there's some cool malware out there, especially with regard to systems of virtualization. So we have a lot of virtualization in our world now and a lot of containerization, things like that. And you used to be able to take some suspected malware and run it inside a virtual system and then be able to say, okay, yeah, that was malware. Now I know I should, quarantine this thing. But then the malware got smarter and it started to realize if I'm running inside of a virtual machine now, I'm not going to run. Or I can tell that I'm being run in a place they're just trying to detect me, and I'll try to obfuscate or hide myself, stealth. So I got some cool stuff out there like that. Rootkit, of course, gaining access and administrative privileges and all that, even all the way down to the OS. So how do you defend against it? We're going to talk more about this in a different light a little bit tomorrow. Legitimate sourcing, that's making sure that, is this person that's claiming to be the developer really the developer, or is this some fake piece of software? We'll talk about that, especially with respect to digital certificates. If you've heard of like Malwarebytes, an example of a program that you can do anti-malware scans. See, security updates, all that kind of normal stuff, system permissions. It says restricting user installation of applications. So what do we call that? It says system permissions, but what do we call that when we're trying to implement to make sure the person can only do as much as they really need to do for their job? What's that called?
Least privilege.
All right, exactly. See how I try to link those concepts for you? Let's see, network security, we'll talk more about those things specifically. Policies and training we've already mentioned. All right. All right, assessment. Yep. Good job. That's a lot of words on that page. Good job. Yay.
Deep worm?
What's that?
Deep worm?
Big worm.
Deep worm?
Yeah, and also with regard to botnet, I didn't mention this before, but there's something called a CNC server. What is C and, like ampersand, C and C? Control and command. So you'll have somebody who's logged into a CNC server, and then that server has communications out to the various bots, robots, and to wake them up and launch attacks.
So control and command go with bot.
Yeah. Or command and control, I think either way is fine. Wow, I just turned the page. You guys are good. Yep. All right. Where are we? Doing good. All right. Network attacks. Okay, some of these things we'll go into a little more than others. Not all of them really require it. Network probes. So they talk about the Christmas attack. So for those of you that know what headers are, in terms of on packets and frames and fun stuff like that, the idea is that the Christmas attack is that they have a whole bunch of these headers and the flags are all turned on, so it kind of lights up like a Christmas tree, the IDS or something like that when it goes through. Fuzzing is a very common term, and it says random data input. And there's sometimes you'll see it as device fuzzing, but the idea of fuzzing is that if you have an application and you want to do a fuzz test on it, right, what you're going to do is you're going to just throw a bunch of data. Now you can throw meaningful data at it and see how it reacts, but it's much more interesting to throw random data at it and see how it reacts. How does it handle that stuff? Because maybe it gets tricked and gives up information it shouldn't. But that's the idea of fuzzing, just giving it some input, see what it does. Banner grabbing, that was interesting. There was a case a long time ago. I'm really dating myself because this was probably more than 20 years ago. But, you know, if you log into a system, that a lot of times it'll come up with a banner, and a lot of times it'll say like, this is the property of the United States government, you know, anybody who's not supposed to be here, blah, 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 blah. All that stuff, that's a banner. There was a case a couple decades ago where a guy had broken into some computer and stolen some stuff, and the company ended up identifying him, and he was arrested, and he went to court, and it turns out he ended up getting acquitted because when he went into this system, there was no banner telling him that he shouldn't be in the system, right? Yeah, so that's when banners became really popular, and that's why you had legal get involved, because this guy's like, it's like, I don't know, I went into this system, it didn't tell me not to. So, I mean, I know exactly, it's laughable, but.
That's like when someone breaks into your house and sues you for getting injured.
Yeah, that's right. I hope you have homeowners, man, because I broke my ankle trying to steal your TV. Spoofing. All different types of ways of spoofing, right? So, definitely spoof an IP address. What's a MAC address? What does MAC stand for?
Media access control.
Yeah, and you're going to learn there's a lot of MACs in our world. There are three in particular. There's media access control, mandatory access control, and message authentication code. So there are three MACs, but this particular one is the MAC address. What layer of the OSI is IP address?
Layer 3.
Yes. Say it loud and proud.
Layer 3.
All right. And what about MAC address? What layer?
Layer 2.
Layer 2. Good. You can, fake email addresses, spoof them, caller ID. One of my favorite ones was one of my good friends, he's also a CISSP instructor as well, and a guy named Clement. I was telling you about Clement earlier. He's from Quebec or Montreal, so he's French Canadian, and he has this French Canadian accent that I can't do very well, but this is the way Clement sounds. And so he was telling this story about one of his buddies that guy never picked up his phone. Like Clement would be calling him and he would never pick up his phone. Well, finally one day Clement managed to get that guy's wife's phone number, and then he spoofed it on the internet. He put in her number, so when that guy's phone rang, he thought it was his wife. He picks up the phone, he's like, hello, and he goes, aha, this is Clement. You must talk to me. And I just had to laugh because I'm like, who does that stuff? But the answer is Clement does that. But yeah, you can spoof. I've never done it though. Spoofed anybody, from a caller ID perspective, but that's pretty a fun thing to do, I'd imagine.
They're doing it.
Yeah. So one thing that they're doing now that drives me crazy is what they're doing is they're getting local access numbers.
Yeah.
So that's the problem, is that now you think it's a local number.
It's like an 808 number.
Yeah.
Like an 808, I was like, I already know that it's.
Yeah. My cell phone, I still have a 540 number, which is Fredericksburg, Virginia. But I'm not going to change my number, but I live, now I live in Savannah. But I see 540 numbers come in and like, yeah, it's just a bunch of garbage. I had a bad call yesterday. It was Miami though. It was 305. I've never had this happen. Called and I knew it was garbage, but I figured I had time to screw with somebody, so I answered anyway. And they never came on. And then it happened, they called, I'm not exaggerating, they probably called inside of 3 minutes. They probably called 15 times. And then I ended up talking to my wife and I was just hitting ignore, ignore, ignore. And then I thought, I better block the number because I'm just tired of getting all these calls. So I go in on my phone and I block the number. Then it started leaving empty voicemails, 15 seconds of silence, but like 15 of them. And it started to DOS my voicemail because I didn't have much space left apparently after 15 of these things. So I'm like, great, now the phone's not ringing, but now they're leaving voicemails. How do I stop that? So I went into my provider online and then blocked the number that way, and then they can't leave messages. So if you ever run into that, don't just do it at the phone level, do it at the provider level through the website.
Google's screening service works really well too.
Oh, really? Okay, I haven't used that.
I don't get calls hardly at all anymore.
Okay.
I use it constantly bombarded.
Do you have to download an app, or is it a turn on switch, or is it settings?
It's part of the latest update.
Well, okay, gotcha.
I got a Google phone.
Okay. Oh, it's like a Pixel or something, or okay, gotcha. I thought when you said that, for some reason I heard Android.
Okay. Same thing.
Gotcha. All right, a couple good attacks here. Let's see. ARP. Okay, what does it stand for?
Address Resolution Protocol.
Okay, so when two hosts communicate, they need two things to communicate, both a hardware address and a software address. What are the synonyms for those two things? What's the synonym for hardware address? MAC address. And what's the synonym for software address? IP address, right? So they need a layer 2 address and a layer 3 address, okay? Now, oftentimes hosts on a network, they might know the MAC address, or they might know the IP address, but they don't know the MAC address. They know the layer 3, but not the layer 2. And they have to do what's called ARPing, right? And an ARP is nothing more than a broadcast out. And basically, it's a system that goes, hey, 10.10.10.10, what's your MAC address? Everybody out there, like just now, every one of y'all heard that. But if you were 10.10.10.10, you'd be the only one to respond, and you'd say, hey, my MAC address is this. And I'd say, okay, great, now I can do a unicast, right? I can talk to you one-on-one. So that's what ARP is, right? And it says usually performed by inside attackers. It has to be, to do an ARP poisoning, and I'll explain it in a minute. To do an ARP poisoning, you have to be on the local area network. And the idea of an ARP poisoning is, let's say you were 10.10.10.10. You told me your MAC address. I'm going to record that MAC address in my ARP table so that next time I want to talk to you one-on-one, I don't have to frickin' yell it out to everybody and get it again. I just look it up and use it. But if you're an attacker and you attack my ARP cache and you poison it, you take out his MAC address and you put in yours. So I think I'm talking to him, but I'm talking to you. Now at that point, you're a man or a woman in the middle, and all you have to do is then you can pass that message along or not or whatever you want, doesn't really matter. But that's what ARP poisoning is. And so ARP is you have the MAC or you have the IP, but you need the MAC. Then there's something called RARP, reverse ARP. So if in ARP you have the IP and need the MAC, what do you think RARP is? You have the, right, and when does that happen? When you boot up, right? You boot up your machine, it's gonna know it's Mac. Why? Where is the Mac located? More specifically? Where specifically is it? Almost? Nope. Nope. On the NIC. It's burned into the network interface card by the manufacturer, right? You're like, damn it. Yeah. So it's burned onto the NIC. So if I'm a computer and I boot up, I'm not on the network yet, I boot up, I'm like, oh, okay, I got to get on the network. Oh, I just have to look down at my layer 2 and there's my MAC address. And then I RARP and I say, hey, does anybody out there want to give me an IP address? Here's my MAC address. And then what kind of a system usually assigns you your IP address? What's that called? Say it again.
DHCP.
Which stands for what?
Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol.
That's right. So a DHCP server is the recipient of RARP traffic, and then it says, oh yeah, here's your IP address. And what are some other things that DHCP also assigns that are very important besides IP address? Gateways, right? So, and how do you know which part is host and which part is network? What is that thing called that allows you to identify that? Give you a hint. It's a yeah, subnet mask, right. So subnet mask, I know that's horrible. That's the best I got, sorry. You guys are like, you suck. Subnet mask, default gateway, how do I get off my network, that kind of stuff. DNS would be another good thing to know, so I can resolve things like that. So ARP poisoning is a local attack on the ARP cache that makes somebody think they're talking to one person when they're really talking to the attacker. Now, there's also this thing called DNS poisoning, and I don't know why let me see if, I don't like this. I don't like the way they describe this. So what I want you to do is, DNS poisoning is really farming, right? They say that farming is similar to phishing, but with compromised DNS. I don't agree with that at all. That doesn't make any sense to me. Let me describe what DNS poisoning / farming is. So how does DNS resolution work? Like if I type in www.cisco.com, what does that really mean? What happens? You don't have to get too technical, but just in general. That's it. It resolves it to an IP. It basically does a lookup and says, okay, you want to go to that because it's a lot easier for me to remember www.cisco.com than it is whatever the IP address is of their web server, right? So that's what DNS is all about. Now here's where farming or DNS poisoning comes in. What happens is an attacker comes in and they will adjust what's typically called the PTR, the pointer record inside the DNS server. The pointer record is what tells you where to go, right? It points you in the right direction. So what they'll do is instead of having whatever the IP address is for Cisco, they'll put in their own attackers, and maybe it's a fake looking Cisco. I don't know what it is, doesn't matter. The point is that now as a user, has the user done anything wrong when they typed in www.cisco.com, enter, and they go to a bad site? They didn't do anything wrong. It was the poison happened at the DNS level, right? And a similar thing, the host file, which is local, can do the same thing. But that's what farming is. So I'm not really sure where they came up with that phishing thing. Yeah.
We had something similar happen yesterday. They took down all DoD networks for about 45 minutes.
Really?
So this next door ran some updates on the DNS servers and wiped them all out. So none of us could resolve to any either commercial or .mil addresses. The only thing that was still working was email.
That's really interesting.
So they had to roll back all the updates they had to about 45.
Got hacked. They got.
Huh.
I think they pushed updates that
Something.
fully passed.
Something broke it. Oh yeah, well that happened.
They broke all the DNS.
Right, and that's a patch management nightmare too, right? And that's one of those things. And when we talk about patch management, that's one of the biggest problems is that oftentimes a patch will do exactly what it's expected to do, but it'll also do stuff it's not expected to do.
They took down our headquarters as well.
Holy crap.
We had problems getting back in.
Wow. That's no good. No bueno. Domain hijacking, kind of that's really what you're doing when you farm somebody. You're, to an imitation website. It's one way of doing it. VLAN hopping, you don't hear that a lot. But what is a VLAN? What is a, oh, sorry, question.
So about the domain hijacking.
Yeah.
So about this, your thing says redirects traffic to a site, but this says it steals the actual domain before they have a chance to
reallocate it or something?
Yeah, see, like when I'm attacking, like YouTube, let's say, before their domain expired and they like have
Yeah.
1 minute to re-register, but somebody came in that 1 minute and took it. So when I search YouTube, it sends me up, crazy people, something, whatever.
Yeah, that's another way of doing it. And there's also, they used to do like a lot of domain squatting people used to do. They would go ahead and buy like Coca-Cola.com before Coca-Cola could.
Yeah.
And then they weren't doing it for malicious, but that was just money.
The new Avengers movie.
Oh, really?
Search for the title of the new Avengers movie. Somebody bought that like 6 months before they came out with the title.
Yeah.
So they have to have something else.
Yeah, it's common. But yeah, there's probably different variations of it, but it's all bad news. So what is a VLAN, first of all? Let's start off there before we get into VLAN. Yeah, a virtual local area network, right? We'll talk a little bit more about it later in some of the architecture stuff and system stuff. But the idea of VLAN hopping is that a VLAN is just like a LAN, except it's virtual. But the idea is that once you are on a particular VLAN, that's the VLAN you should be on unless you get routed to another VLAN. But what some people will do is there's ways to trick the system into hopping onto another VLAN. I don't know any real details about it. I don't see it in the news very often, if ever. Say what?
That's when you have poor access control bus.
Yeah, ACLs are important for sure. Yeah, there's some interesting tagging stuff that goes on there as well. And some of the, there's a port that I'm not remembering the name of that people can also take advantage of. But
We utilize them a lot in our networks.
the VLANs, yeah, it's pretty common. This was just a screen grab from one of the labs. Oh, and let me pause on this for a second. So there are labs that are associated, you'll see them in your book. There are labs associated with this. Here's what I'll tell you. If we have computers, we can get those computers for you if you need them. They're not really quote unquote necessary, but if you want them, there's a couple things on the computers that you can do. Number one, you can do these labs if you want to do these labs. Number two, there's a practice test engine. So if at some point, like after hours or something, we can talk with Matt, get you guys a computer, you want it, do some practice test stuff, you're more than welcome to do it, not a problem. What I will tell you for the exam is that the labs are not, and I'm putting it in air quotes, necessary. Not that they can't help you to reinforce ideas and to understand things, but it's not necessary for you to be able to pass the exam. There's different question types. Some of the questions are kind of what we call performance-based questions, where there might be something where you have to maybe do a drag and drop. Maybe you have to put the order of something, like let's say for risk assessment, right? What do you put these right in the right order? There could even be other things where you have to click on it to do a certain thing, and if you click the wrong spot, you don't get the credit. But what I will tell you is this: there aren't very many of those, and here's where people get hosed on the test. Do not waste your time on those things. If you don't know the answer immediately, just mark it. You can come back to it later, but mark it and move on, because there aren't going to be that many of them. What a lot of people do, they screw themselves with time. They sit there like, oh my God, I can't remember this. Got to figure it out, and they spend 4 or 5 minutes on that one question. Don't do it. Just miss the question. Get the others right? There's just a lot more. So that's kind of part of the strategy around this. So I'm not telling you not to do the labs. I'm not telling you can't learn something from them. I'm just telling you that it's not required. It's not a necessity. But if you want to do it, we have the computers available. You're more than welcome to do it. So this is just a screen grab from it. Whatever. We're just going to move on. All right. Denial of service. This is good stuff. So the distributed denial of service, the distributed, we talked about that with botnets. There you see a botnet, right? There's the attacker. Now what they don't show on this slide that I wish they did is that they don't show the attacker going to a CNC server and then the CNC server reaching out. So in an ideal world, I would change this diagram, and above the attacker, I would just move the attacker up, and then where the attacker is, I would just have a CNC, a command and control server. And that's really kind of more realistic. Reflected denial of service, which is also a distributed denial of service. Now that's a very interesting drawing. I'm going to kind of draw it a little bit differently. Not that it's bad, I just prefer my own. Has anybody heard of an attack called Smurf?
Nope.
You have now. Smurf attack. So here's what happens. You've got attacker. Then you've got victim.
Gargamel?
What's that?
Gargamel?
Yes, whatever you want it to be. Little blue people. Okay, so we're going to say that this person is making up IP addresses that don't really matter. Now, I'm also prefacing this with, I'm using IP addresses that are not routable on the internet. These are RFC 1918 addresses, and I realize that, and it doesn't matter. I'm just putting numbers there so that you see they're different. That's all I'm doing, okay? I'm not getting hyper technical here. What kind of device is that? Kind of standard nomenclature? Router, yeah. Horrible drawing, but it's supposed to be a firewall. It doesn't look like a wall. It doesn't, but it is. Firewall. And then that's not a real term. BAN stands for big ass network. That's all I'm just trying to tell you, it's a big ass network, right? So somebody explain to me how ping works.
You send a message from one node to another node to see if you can talk to it.
Okay.
Let's say it sends 4 packets. That distant end responds back to let it know that it sees its call. It communicates probably like 4 times.
Okay.
And then you get a resolution of whether or not everything can get whether
And what protocol is used for ping?
ICMP.
Right. And in particular, when you ping somebody, you're sending what? It's called an ICMP echo request. Okay? And what do you think comes back? An ICMP echo
Response.
reply is the term, right? So that's the way you normally do it. You ping somebody. Now, the way this works, and this is the Smurf attack, which is an example of a reflected distributed denial of service attack. The way this thing happens is the attacker will send an IP, that was weird, will send an ICMP, will send an ICMP echo request to a big ass network, but as its source IP address, it puts in now, is that his source IP address?
No.
Whose is it? Yep. So when he sends this across, and basically, let's say there's 10,000 nodes over here, he sends it across. Essentially what he's saying is that, hey, all you 10,000 nodes, are you there? I want to know. And we're going to assume they're all there, so what do?
They respond back.
Yeah. So they all reply, but they all reply to this guy, right? So 10,000. Also, this guy is just sitting here. Let's say he sells cheese online for a living. He's sitting there, and all of a sudden, 10,000 people go, hey, we're here. He's like, what the hell's going on here? And now I can't sell cheese, and I'm getting DOSed, right? So that's the idea of the Smurf attack. Now, this can still work in the real world, but most organizations know that, number one, you would never accept an inbound ICMP message. You just wouldn't do it, right? Just, I'm not going to do that, right? And they know certain things like the source IP address as it's coming into our network should never be an internal address. That's another thing, right? So that should never happen. So this, not that it can't work, it can work, but most companies aren't going to let this happen. But meanwhile, this guy, he just sits back and lets this guy go down. And that's the idea of a Smurf attack. Kind of cool attack, as far as attacks go.
Most places block extra pings.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's funny because a lot of companies now, they just throw it in the bit bucket. Like you don't even get a response, like because there's all different types of responses, and people who are doing recon, they're knocking on the door, they want to see what kind of response they get. And if it just goes into a black hole into the bit bucket, then you don't get any kind of response, which is probably the good way to go. All right. It's lunchtime. I'm hungry. How's that for a break? Rather abrupt. All right. Let's see. You guys are doing a good job. I would say it is basically noon, maybe 12:01, something like that. Come back here at 1 o'clock and be ready to rock and roll. All right. 1 o'clock. You guys ready to roll? Did everybody that's in here come up and sign this yet? Let's make sure we get that done. There you go. All right, everybody else is signed in. Ooh, that's a lovely voice you got there.
The radio voice.
Yeah, my face for radio. That's my 909 call, you know. Hi there, my name's Hack. All right, so some variants, different types of denial of service. So we covered Smurf. Ping of death is another one, and it talks about using either oversized or malformed packets. And of course, you can just, defenses against that is just don't allow, packet fragmentation is another one that they can do. But oversized packets, malformed packets, the system will basically crash because it doesn't know how to process it. SYN flood's a good one. So what am I talking about when I talk about a three-way handshake? What am I referring to? Anyone online? Hey, online folks, glad you're there.
There's about a 45-second delay.
Oh, okay, come on. All right. Anybody recognize that term, three-way handshake? So how do two computers talk to each other? How do they get started talking? What is that?
Session establishment.
Right, and let's say they're using TCP versus UDP, and hopefully those things mean something to you. If they don't, we can cover it later. But if they're using TCP, is TCP connection-oriented or connection-less? It is connection, right? Transmission Control Protocol. Yep, it's connection. So what that means is that, let's say, I'm a machine and you're a machine, and I want to talk with you. If I'm using UDP, UDP is User Datagram Protocol. UDP is connectionless, and it is quite literally the equivalent of this. If I had a message for you, and let's say my message is in a football, right? I've got a football, and in UDP, all I do, I just chuck it. I don't even watch where it goes. I don't give a crap. I have no idea if it ever got there. I just chuck it. But in TCP, we're going to establish a connection. So what we do is what's called a three-way handshake. And it's typically said as SYN, SYNAC, ACK, right? Synchronize, acknowledge, and that's really in reverse though. I'll explain that in a minute. And then acknowledge. So the way it works is that the SYN is me saying, hey, I would like to have a conversation. And then you actually acknowledge. The way it's written is always SYN, SYNAC, ACK, but it's technically SYN, ACK, SYN, ACK, because he acknowledges my message and then synchronizes. So I say, hey, I'd like to talk with you. You say, I understand that you'd like to talk to me. What would you like to talk about? I'd like to talk about barbecue. And then we make a connection and we go back and forth. So a SYN flood, right, is when you flood a system. What I do is I just take about 10,000 systems and I tell them all to initiate a conversation with you. So you're sitting there minding your own business, you're a server, and all of a sudden 10,000 people go, all at the same time, go, I want to have a conversation with you. And you're like, you know, you only have so many resources to be able to handle that. You can't do it. So that's what a SYN flood. And the reason it's a little bit goofy is because most people refer to this as, they refer to it as SYN, SYNAC, ACK. But the way it really works is if you've got host computer, I don't know why I put B first, that's pretty funny. Can't even do the alphabet. You have host computer A, and another one over here, B. Not sure why that one disappeared, any idea? Draw it again. And B, what happens is there's first a SYN, I'd like to talk to you. Then there's an acknowledgement, and then a synchronize, and then a final ACK. So you can see that when people talk about it, what's that?
That's like the last acknowledgement. Wouldn't it just be like a response?
No, it's an acknowledgement because it's an actual flag in the header. It's an ACK flag. So the way we always say it is SYN, SYNAC, and ACK, just because it's easier to say. But you can see it's actually SYN, ACK, SYN, ACK. But that'll get you no points on the test. It'll just make you a little bit brighter in the real world. So there you go. And then permanent DOS versus unintentional. It's kind of funny. A permanent denial of service is, I don't know, you take a server and kick the crap out of it and you can't do anything with it, right? It's not like you just electronically stopped a transmission. You just blew up the box. That would be permanent. And then unintentional. That can happen sometimes if, and this happens to retailers all the time around Christmas time, Black Friday, that kind of stuff. They think they're ready for all the traffic that they're going to get. And all of a sudden, next thing you know, whatever widget they're selling is the hot new widget for the 7-year-olds out there. And everybody wants to buy it, and boom, the website goes down. Right? So, Pete, by the way, did you sign in? I just want to make sure that everybody... You did not? Sorry, I can get you to... No, it's okay. Just sign in and just check on day one that you're here, and we'll call it even. All right. This high orbit ion cannon is a little lab thing that you can do. It's a little simulator for distributed denial of service. Again, it's a lab. If you want to do it, knock yourself out. Not required. Oh boy, I love me some password stuff. This is awesome. So, I was telling a story up here to Mike. I'll just repeat it really quickly. So, one of my favorite password stories was a chief technology officer at a company I worked at. He never knew his password, and the reason he didn't is because he did all his passwords based on kind of a kinesthetic theory. What he would do is he'd put his hands on the keyboard and he would hum a tune. So like, boop, 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 and he would just move his fingers to whatever the tune was. And so it was just a kinesthetic thing. It was just, he would just sit down at a keyboard. He never knew his password. He just knew how to do that thing. It was all fine and dandy until we had to use an internet cafe in Paris one time. They have a different keyboard layout. So he gets up there, he's like, boop, 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 shit. And he had to go all the way back to the hotel, get his laptop, do it, write it down on a piece of paper, bring it back to the cafe, and do his thing. So he outsmarted himself. I thought it was pretty funny. At first, I thought it was really nifty. Then I'm like, you're an idiot. Not that he really is. He's a genius. But okay, let's talk about password cracking. Cool stuff here. So what does it mean to brute force a password? What are you really doing?
To try every possible thing you can possibly try.
Yeah, it's an iterative attack, right? You may start with A, B, right? Whatever the case is. But it's an iterative attack. That's a brute force. You're just going to sit there and try it as long as you have to, okay? Dictionary attack we're going to go over in a minute. I'm going to come back to that. The hybrid attack, to be honest, I'm not even sure that's a real thing. Hybrid attack, dictionary plus common variations. I don't even know what that means. I don't think that's real. I do want to talk about birthday, and I'll do it also with rainbow. Let me talk about birthday for a minute, and then I'm going to do rainbow table. Pass the hash, a little bit different. We don't need to really know about the details on that one. But are you guys familiar with the birthday paradox? That's what this is kind of based on. So the birthday paradox states that if you wanted to have a 50% chance of having two people in a room that share the same birthday, you only need to have 23 people in the room. Now, how many potential birthdays are there in a year? 365 different options. But to have two people that match, you only need 23 to have a 50% chance. That's pretty good. Now, so if I said, if the empty room were empty and I said, look, I need people to come here, I need two birthdays. I only need 23 people to have a 50-50 shot. But what if I said, I want two people who were both born on July 11th? Now, yeah. So now instead of 23 people, I need 253 people to have a 50-50 shot. Why? What's the difference? That's right. Specificity. The first time I said, I don't care which of the 365 days match. Doesn't matter to me, right? But the other one I was very specific. And the reason that's important is because later on and tomorrow when we talk about hashing, that's why I don't want to really talk about past the hash right now, but when we talk about hashing, the way hashing works, hashing is a comparison, okay? And what you do, who knows what a hash is? I won't go into it too deep, but who can tell me at least basic definition of what a hash is? Okay, then I'm going to save it. So there are algorithms, yes, it is an algorithm, but I'll give you more stuff tomorrow. I don't want to get bogged down on that today. But the birthday attack is important. So let me go ahead and I know how to do this now. Yeah, Matthew taught me cool stuff. But I want to talk about this with regard to this whole dictionary attack and other fun stuff. So I'm going to use a bunch of terms, and I'm going to check with you. Oh yeah, I want to do put this on here. Did you just do that for me?
I got it.
Look at that. You're like a rookie.
He's been doing it for you the whole time.
Oh, stop that. Damn it. I hate when I let people down. All right, so let's talk about passwords for a minute. So I'm going to throw in a bunch of stuff here just to kind of test your knowledge, see where you are, and fill in some gaps if needed. All right. So has anybody in this room or online, for part of your job, I'm very specific with that, for part of your job, cracked passwords before? Okay.
Password cracker to get into the machine, but it was a disk.
What's that now? Say that again?
A disk.
Oh, a disk? Oh, yeah, you just ran the disk. So, all right, does anybody know in terms of networking infrastructure something called a SAM database? SAM? What does that stand for? Do you remember?
Security account.
Manager, I think. Security account manager. Okay, so I'm going to draw a little picture for you here. Yeah. SAM database, okay? That's my idea of a database. Now, when you have a password to get into the network, you have to type in a password. And just for argument's sake, I'm going to say my password is ABC123. Okay. Oh no, I'm going to make it password. That's how bad it is. My password is so bad that my password is password. Okay, you never do that in real life. Now, when you store your password in the database, this is to log on to a network, so like your network here, it doesn't actually store your password. It stores a hash of your password. Now, without getting into the details of it, just know the basics of all a hash is you take a password, you run it through a mathematical algorithm, and it spits out an answer. Okay, that's all you really need to know for now. So I'm going to say, here's my password. That's my password. When I run it through a hash, can anybody give me an example of a hashing algorithm? You've probably heard of several, but I'll give you the most common one, MD5. Most people have heard of MD5. It stands for Message Digest 5. So we're going to run it through MD5, and that's going to yield a result. It's a hash. And that hash, for argument's sake, this is not a real hash, I'm making this up, is ABC123. All this means is that when I type in my password, it gets translated into this hash value, And that hash value is what then gets stored in the SAM database. Not the actual password. If the actual password got stored in there and somebody broke into it, we'd all be screwed, right? That doesn't make any sense. This is what the hash is about, this basic level stuff. We'll go 201 and 301 tomorrow. Now, everybody on the network, well, let me ask it in the form of a question. Is it possible, I'm not saying probable, I'm not saying likely, is it theoretically possible that everybody on this network has the exact same password?
Yes. Theoretically, yeah.
Theoretically, it is possible. So let's just pretend that they all do. Everybody has the same password. Now, anytime you run password through MD5, it's going to come out ABC123. So if that's my password and your password is also a password, guess what your hash is going to be? And guess what your hash is going to be? Everybody's is the same. Why? The same input will always yield the same output. Every time. Now, if you got all fancy with me and did password 1, deal's off. But right now, everybody is the same thing. Okay? So here's what happens. Now, I'm getting to my whole kind of dictionary, birthday, rainbow table thing. So let's say you get a hacker. Hacker gets into your system. And you have your SAM database sitting over here. They make a copy of that, and they send a copy out through the internet connection back to their house. So now, here's your SAM database at the hacker's house. Now, let's say on this network there's 100 of us. So there would be 100 instances. I'm not going to draw them all. Right? There's 100 instances of this. Now, there are some misnomers with hashing. Some people call hashing, like I'll say, they'll say, oh, you can just reverse it. If I reverse this, I'll get password. Here's the problem with that. Another term for a hash is what's called a one-way function. So guess how many directions a one-way function can actually go? Yeah, it's not rocket surgery, right? It goes one way. So there is no such thing as reversing a hash. It doesn't exist. It's quite literally impossible. Does not exist. Cannot do it. It's a one-way function. So what that means is that when people say, oh, you just reverse the hash, they don't know what they're talking about. Can't do that. So how do you do it? Remember, I told you in the beginning of this that hashes rely on comparisons. Okay? So there is a tool out there, and it's up there, called a rainbow table. I'm just going to call it RT. It is a database, as you can see by my drawing. The rainbow table is nothing more than a collection of what are called pre-calculated hashes. And the reason people don't want you using dictionary words is because one of the first things in the rainbow tables is all the words in the dictionary hashed and their associated hashes. So in the rainbow table, if you were to start off at the first thing, you would see aardvark. That's the first word in the dictionary, aardvark. I think it is anyway, should be. It has 2 A's in it. We'll go with aardvark, right? So aardvark, and maybe that comes out to, you run it through MD5, it comes out to DEF 456. Doesn't really matter. But guess what word is actually in the dictionary? The word password is in the dictionary. Now, in a pre-calculated hash, if in the dictionary they took the dictionary word password and they ran it through MD5, take a wild stab in the dark at what the hash value would be. Maybe it has to be the same thing. Same input will always yield the same output. So one of the entries here, now there's going to be a lot of other stuff as well, but the point is that the attacker now, all they have to do is take your SAM database and all the hashes that are in here, and they run it through the rainbow tables, and they say, hey, tell me when you get a match. And it goes, all of a sudden it compares, it goes ABC123, ABC123, ding, 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 I got a match. And then you say, okay, rainbow table, how did you actually calculate ABC123? Oh, it was easy. Took the word password, and I ran it through MD5. Guess how many of your passwords just got compromised?
100.
100, all of them, right? So dictionary attack, rainbow table, this all kind of goes together. This is one way of cracking it. Now, inside the rainbow table, it's not just dictionary words. They do common phrases. People like to pull out lyrics from songs. There's a million different things you can do. Yeah.
Is that case sensitive?
Oh yeah, no, it'll do everything. And not only will it do case sensitive stuff, all that, but it uses different algorithms, right? Maybe it'll use SHA-1, SHA-2, whatever it is, different algorithms for hashing. But this is how passwords are cracked in this type of an attack, which you could call a dictionary attack. Now the reason the birthday comes into play here, and you'll see this more tomorrow when we talk of crypto, is that based on what I described about the birthday paradox, which do you think is more difficult? Is it more difficult for me to say, hey, go find any two hashes that match, or if I give you a hash, say find out what matches that? Which is more difficult? The first one or the second one? Why? It's specific, exactly. So in hashing, there's a term called collisions. That's what this is. This is a collision in that, now I shouldn't even say that. You know what, this is a match, not a collision. I'm gonna change that nomenclature here, and here's why. This is a match because both have the same input. If you had two different inputs that yielded the same output, which is not supposed to happen, but it does, that's a collision, that's different. This is just a matching of the hashes, right? So if you have a password to a website, and let's say you go on that website and you've forgotten your password, there's usually a link there that says, forgot my password. When you click that link, here's what's supposed to happen. You're supposed to get a link from them saying, here, reset your password, and then you choose a new password. What shouldn't happen, but it sometimes does, is they send you an email with your password in clear text. When that happens, you know for an absolute fact, your password was stored as password, not as a hash. Because if it were a hash, they couldn't have figured that out. Can't reverse it. So anytime you get an email like that, and if it has your password, don't do business with that company or talk to them or do whatever you got to do. That's bad news.
It just means they didn't run it through a hashing algorithm.
Yeah, it means they kept it in plain text. Yeah, so that anybody could see it. Yeah. That's bad juju.
I actually like those people. It's easy.
They send you your
Thanks,
password.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I really needed it.
Yeah. Not the way you want to go from a security perspective. Convenience, yes. But
It's been a long time since I've had one.
all right. That was a fun one. Any questions on that? Does it make sense at least? If you're not, even if you weren't familiar with it, you get it now?
I have a question. You mentioned earlier, you made the statement that it uses SHA-1, SHA-2, MD5.
The rainbow
The
table.
rainbow table would have all possible outputs from all the different.
That's right, because when you run any input through a different hashing algorithms,
Right.
you're going to get different hashes because it's a different algorithm. You're putting it through different math. But the point is that they would take password and run it through MD5, SHA-1, SHA-2, whatever. There's probably others that I'm forgetting now. But there's a whole host, half a dozen or so at least, of different common hashing algorithms. And they would run password through each one, get the hash for each one, and it would be listed in the rainbow table. Because you don't know, at my company now, we use MD5, but somebody else may use some other hash.
So what difference does it make how complicated the password is?
Well, for brute forcing, that's the big one. And also for this, because the complicated, the longer it is, the more complex it is, the less likely they're going to have that combination of things, right? Because that's not going to really exist in the real world. And like the example you were showing me, like, who the hell's going to come up with that, right? So, all right, see, look, I can do this on my own. Maybe. All right. Oh, eavesdropping. That's a good one. Where's that term come from?
Spies.
What is it? Like, if you had to break it down, what are eaves?
The roof.
Yeah, the roof line, right? Kind of dropping over there. Yeah, you're dropping over there, listening in. Eavesdropping, right? I've heard people say it as eavesdropping. I'm like, Yeah, no, it's eaves, like the eaves. Yeah. What's that? Yes.
That was eavesdropping.
Awesome. I love it. Eavesdropping, yeah.
Okay.
So packet sniffing. Anybody familiar with something called Wireshark? Okay. What do you use Wireshark for?
Tracking activity on the network.
Yep. Sniffing the network, usually for good purposes, but it can also be for bad. But that's packet sniffing. Let's see. Circumventing segmentation. I was worried about that. Plain text protocols. So when I talked about Telnet, that's a great example. Telnet is a protocol that sends credentials in plain text. Bad juju, don't do that. There's another one we talk about later called PAP, Password Authentication Protocol. We don't use it anymore because it did it in plain text. So bad choice. Bless you. Man in the middle attacks. Nothing terribly sexy here. Replay attacks and session replay, session hijacking, these are all kind of the same idea. And it shows in the picture that you've got the attacker who sits in the middle. And there's different attacks we're going to talk more specifically about later in the week. But the idea is that if somebody has a session between themselves and a server, and you are able to piggyback onto their session or continue using it or use it again, then you are spoofing as if you are them. You're masquerading as them. And then you can continue on that session. You can do all kinds of bad things that you want to do, right? That's the idea of man in the middle. The attack, what was the attack that I gave you an example of earlier where it was a man in the middle, but it was an attack at the local area network level? It involved MAC addresses and IP addresses. Remember ARP cache poisoning? So the ARP cache poisoning, you were the attacker because you went ahead and you substituted your own MAC address in place of his, and that caused me to send you messages thinking I was sending them to him. And I said you were the woman in the middle, the woman instead of the man in the middle. Yeah, maybe they should change it to person in the middle. I don't know how sensitive people are. Man in the middle. Downgrading, so I don't know how often this happens, but the idea is that your browsers are supposed to know which, and it's called a cipher suite, which cipher suites to use when they communicate. And sometimes an attacker could trick your browser into downgrading to a lesser cipher suite that is vulnerable, or maybe even all the way down into plain text, and they can take advantage of that. And then man in the browser is really when, we talked about Trojan horses earlier, so an attacker can use a Trojan horse or some other kind of spyware to get you to click on something and then taking actions on your behalf and masquerading as you.
I have a question.
Yep.
When we take the exam, is the exam going to potentially refer to some of these things differently than what we see? Like up here you have man in the middle attack. What I see in the book as a variation is capital M.
MITM?
Capital M. Is the test possibly going to do that?
It shouldn't. I would say be prepared, but typically it's commonplace to actually spell out acronyms. But you also have to be careful because depending on what the question is, they could spell out an acronym that isn't a real acronym either. That's why I always want you to know both, like man in the middle, right? And so MITM, that's fine, you should know that. But if they said, can't imagine they would do this, but if they said MITM stands for, well, you better know what it stands for, right? Not masquerading in the middle or whatever the case is. So I would say I wouldn't be overly worried about it, but you should definitely you should try to know them as best you can. But yeah, I think you'll probably see it spelled out. That's pretty common testing protocol now. Because the idea is that, and they used to not do that, and then people got upset because the idea is you're not really testing them on whether or not they know the acronym. You're trying to test them on the foundational knowledge related to it. So it's considered commonplace now to spell it out. I was just involved in writing an exam for an IoT security class, and we had to spell out every one of them. So that's pretty common now. Okay, good stuff, man. Wireless. Got some fun stuff here. Okay, different wireless attacks. So war driving is a good one to know. That's just, driving around looking for open Wi-Fi hotspots. Nothing terribly sexy there. I'll go back to the encryption attacks in a second. So rogue AP, or rogue access point, is basically a piece of infrastructure that somebody put there just trying to get people to think it's a different access point and get them to log on and start stealing credentials, which is not nice. And then the one that's related to that, right under it, is the evil twin, right? It says used for man in the middle. There it is, MITM, used for man in the middle. And the difference between a rogue AP and an evil twin is that an evil twin is a rogue AP, but a rogue AP is not necessarily an evil twin. It's like the whole square rectangle, paradox. But a rogue AP can just be somebody's access point that they put up trying to get you to connect to it. An evil twin is when they're trying to get you to think that it's specifically your organization's access point, and they name it, whatever the SSID is to try to trick you into thinking that. A little bit different. Disassociation is the idea that you can get somebody to get bumped off of a legitimate access point and then reconnect because they get disassociated, and when they try to reassociate, they come onto your fake one. Not very nice to do. Jamming, not a big deal. I never hear of this in public, like the whole bluejacking. This is all based on Bluetooth, right? So bluejacking, unsolicited spam messages. Again, I don't read about it. I don't see much in there. Blue snarfing, that's pretty funny. That's, again, just being close enough, because I think Bluetooth, so you know what a LAN is, right? LAN, what does LAN stand for? And then there's WAN, what is that? And then there's MAN, what's that one? Metropolitan. And then there's PAN. Right, and that's what Bluetooth is. Bluetooth is considered a PAN, a personal area, like within 30 feet, somewhere in that neighborhood, something like that. And so blue snarfing is the idea of kind of stealing information from being within that range. NFC, anybody remember what that stands for? Near field communication, I think, yeah. You have to be really close, like inches away from somebody. If you think about contactless credit card payments and things like that, tap to pay, that kind of thing, that's kind of what we're talking about there. RFID. So, yeah, I remember when they first came out with these things. Remember with the passports, they finally started including RFID, and then what did people? There was a pretty big deal going on with this for a long time. If I wanted to protect this because I was worried about somebody reading this RFID reader, what would I have to put this into? Yeah, some kind of, essentially it's a Faraday cage, really, right? Some kind of a Faraday cage. We can talk more about that stuff later. It's not really critical for this. But the reason people were freaking out is because this RFID has some information on it. Even if it has nothing more than the fact it's a US passport, if somebody had rigged a bomb to a system, and that system was reading RFID chips and said, hey, the next American passport that comes through here, blow up, right? So gotta be careful with RFID. Now, on the encryption side, it talks about things like WEP and TKIP and WPS. We're going to get into that much more tomorrow. But what's interesting is talk about weak encryption, and that's what WEP talks about. We'll get into the details a little bit more, but there is a thing in WEP itself, right? I can't remember what it stands for. Wireless or wired equivalency protocol, something like that. I don't remember the exact translation now. But the problem isn't really with WEP itself. It's with a component of WEP called an IV. And just remember this for tomorrow. It's called an initialization vector, an IV. And I'll explain the basics of it now, and then tomorrow we'll get into it a little bit more. But the idea is that if you tell a computer, hey, computer, spit me out 10 random digits, it's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. If you tell it to do it again, say, computer, give me 10 random digits. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. It's going to do that same thing every time. Computers don't understand random. It doesn't mean anything to them. So what you have to do is you have to tell them, spit me out 10 random numbers and start here, and you point to the number 5. And then it'll do something different, right? The point is that's called an initialization vector. Initialization means where do you start? Start here. So it's really important in cryptography that you utilize initialization vectors because it keeps randomness very high. Now, as a security person, you want randomness to be high, but as an attacker, you don't want randomness to be high. So we'll talk more about that, but there are certain protocols that you just shouldn't use anymore, WEP being one of them, because it's weak. And it's weak because the initialization vector, not because the actual protocol. All right. Oh, testing already. All right, let's see what we got here.
See?
I didn't even read it yet.
Choose all of it.
I need to. I'm tired now. All right. Choose all the apply. Complex passwords, combination. Okay.
Dictionary.
Yep. Brute force and dictionary.
Oh, just those two.
Yeah.
I'll just yell all of them out. They don't need a chance.
You didn't even talk about 0 day.
No, I mentioned it once. But yeah, what is a 0-day attack?
Just a certain day, an event or a time.
Kind of, sort of. It's the first instance of whatever that attack is. Day 0, right? Nobody's ever seen it before, and all of a sudden it comes out. Boom, there it is. That's day 0. So if you're using a signature-based technology like antivirus, and you have a 0-day virus that comes out, how effective is your antivirus software going to be? 0, because you don't have a signature for it. You've never seen it before. Yep.
On the DoD, they also use 0 day for stigs and patches that come out. If it's a 0 day vulnerability, they expect us to do the patches immediately that day, by us having a week to prep and test for patches.
Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah, that makes sense, because that's high priority, right?
Yeah,
Makes perfect sense.
stop what you're doing and apply the patches.
Yep.
Okay.
That's a good one. Yeah, so this is the thing. So the man in the middle, right? Definitely avoid to open Wi-Fi routers because you never know what you're connecting to, right? The reason that it's not B though is because again, while technically it could happen, the idea is they're thinking more phishing in that particular attack. Firewall's not going to help you. Andy's not going to help you. He's not going to help you. So yeah, the best answer is A. Yeah, definitely B. And then reflection, definitely. They added also C in here, malformed packets, which is interesting. I get where they're coming from. I just don't think it's a great answer, but the idea that you send malformed packets, the system doesn't know what to do with it, and so it ends up just DOSing. I don't think it's a great answer, but I can work with it.
What's the DOS again?
What is it?
Out of service.
Denial of service.
Okay.
That's what it was.
And there it is. No? Because you're trying to get me to attach to an access point that I...
It's man in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. Next one. Oh, wow. This should be easy now.
0 day.
Yep.
4.
Just told us that.
Yeah. All right, application attacks. All righty. So privilege escalation, I think we've covered that enough now, talked about why that's important. Directory traversal, really just trying to find out what's on the system. That's all part of kind of reconnaissance as well. We're moving into the applications here, but the idea is that you're still finding out what the directory's structure is. Yeah, interesting. These are so high level, I don't think they're really all that useful, but arbitrary code execution says running malicious code on target. That would be part of what you also do in vulnerability testing and things like that, vulnerability assessment, pen testing. And then resource exhaustion, what's another, we just used the term for that. If you use all your resources, what kind of, yeah, it's a denial of service, exactly, too much data. All right, so header manipulation, we talked about that in terms of packets, changing values in headers used by communication protocol. So I talked to you earlier about like a Christmas tree attack as an example of that. If you were to do MAC or IP spoofing, that is of course header manipulation as well. You're manipulating the header and trying to masquerade as somebody that you're not. Memory manipulation can be interesting. There's a lot of really interesting attacks in there. We don't have to know them for this course. But when you're talking about the way these applications are supposed to work is they're supposed to carve out a piece of memory that they're supposed to use and then stay within that piece of memory. And then when they're done with it, flush it out, not use it, and then somebody else can use it. But if you can manipulate the memory to stay resident, and then the information that was in there stays in there, and then you can sniff that information out of there, then that's problematic for sure. I was trying to think, there was a cool story. I have to think if I remember that one on the memory stuff. The irony that I can't remember the memory story. And then, of course, injection. So are you guys familiar with SQL injection? One of the most common ones. So what is SQL? What does it stand for, first of all? Anybody remember? Structured query language, right? And in SQL injections, I guess I can draw this out too. It might be a good thing to do here. This will be a good example. Help it stick a little bit. Okay, so how many of you have ever filled out a form on the web? Hopefully everybody, right? So here's your form. Here's your web server. And what does RAM stand for? Yeah, perfect. Okay, so we're going to say that you're on a website and this is the form. You've got this form in your browser and it's asking for your zip code. Oh, there's a little submit button down here. Submit. So you put in your zip code. You click submit. It passes it up to here. The way this application is designed is it takes that input and it puts it in here. Okay? That's the way it's designed to work. Here's where the problem comes in. Bad people will not just put in their zip code. What they will also do is add, and I'm not going to write one out, but add some kind of a SQL, because they know there's a database on the back side here. SQL I is SQL injection. And then what they'll do is put SQL code in there. Now, what will happen is, the way this is supposed to work is that it's just supposed to take the numbers and put them in there. But some people, when they write applications, they don't do what's called parameter validation or verification, either one. And the idea being that what should be in this code is it should say, when somebody hits submit, I'm going to look at whatever they entered. And I'm expecting 5 digits between 0 and 9. If it's anything other than that, throw that shit away. That doesn't happen though. A lot of times they just pass it along. So what ends up happening is this whole thing goes and it gets put into RAM, and I'm going to kind of extend my drawing in here. The 31324 goes right in there, but then the rest of that SQL code gets written out in another part of memory. And now that it's, when these things are together, the 31324 SQL code, it means nothing. But when you put them in memory and you separate them, now this gets acted on, and that could be code to say, hey, dump your database or give me all the files or whatever the code happens to ask it to do. That's what a SQL injection is, right? So the idea is that if you don't do proper validation of input, you are going to leave yourself open to that. And there's other types. There's XML input as well, or injection. There's LDAP. Anybody know what LDAP is? That's a good one. Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. So LDAP is what Windows is based on in terms of the directory services, is based on LDAP. It uses that communication protocol. So you can do LDAP injection as well. Buffer overflow says sending too much information to an application. That's essentially what this is. This is a form of a buffer overflow. You might also see it as buffer overrun, possible. But buffer overflow, I've overflowed the buffer, and then the results is that whatever I overflowed it with goes into another part of memory and gets executed. Bad things happen. Integer overflow, you can see that, something exceeding the maximum size to store it. All of this stuff is relatively easy to prevent with good coding practices, but not a lot of people practice good coding, so it's still a lot of this out there. Pointer dereference, so pointers will, they talk about, like, people say, like, I don't understand how the cops found that. Like, I deleted that thing months ago. Like, what do you mean you deleted? Well, I right-clicked on it, and I dragged it into the trash bin, and I emptied the trash bin. I'm like, it doesn't actually delete anything. All it does is it removes what's called the pointer, telling it where to go. But somebody who knows anything about forensics can still go in and find the data. The data's still there. You just got rid of the pointer. So pointer dereference is the idea, again, where you can, like it says, directly retrieve values it points to. You can go ahead and dereference those and then make it useless. People can't get to what they need. Memory leaks, similar idea. Allocate memory and never release it. So like I said earlier, you want an application to put instructions into memory, use it, and then dump it. And that doesn't always happen. That was kind of cool. This is a lab. Again, if you decide to do the labs later. Oh, here's SQL injection a little bit more. These are just some characteristics of it. I don't think that you really need to go deep into this. Unfiltered escape characters, says special characters used by SQL. So anytime you're doing any kind of code, if you're expecting SQL code coming through, you need to make sure that you only get SQL code and you don't let them put in other code that isn't allowed to be there. Improper input types. Stacked queries, again, this is really, I think, this is probably a little bit too much detail, especially for the exam, but taking multiple queries and appending them one after the other, you're on the other side, your application should recognize that and go, yeah, I'm not really a big fan of that. I'm not going to allow that to happen. And signature evasion, that's no different than anything else, right? People will have an intrusion detection system that will have signatures for different types of SQL injection attacks. And the attackers think, well, gee, if I send that attack across the network, the IDS is going to see it and it's going to go off. So how can I not do that? Oh, I'm going to fragment this. I'm going to put part of the code here, part of it here, but then when it reaches its destination, we're going to put it back together. Now it's a real code. And we got around the signature because it didn't look like the signature. NoSQL, these are non-relational databases. If you don't need to know a lot about databases for this class, I wouldn't be too worried about it. But when you think about, you guys have heard of big data, it's a very common term now. Big data, NoSQL databases. These are databases that, a normal database, like, well, I say normal, But when we talk about a relational database is kind of what you think of when you think of a regular database. Here's your database, and it's got a bunch of tables in it, and there's primary keys and foreign keys and stuff like that. That's a relational database because each one of these things relates to another table. Non-relational databases are things you would store like video files or image files. Those are objects, but they're not relational objects. Again, LDAP I talked about a little bit. That's just directory service stuff. XML I wouldn't worry about. Command injection, no big deal. And DLL, I may remember what that stands for, DLL? Yep, dynamic link library. It's all the kind of libraries that applications use to run. They call it those libraries to call certain functions in. You can inject in there and put something bad. This is actually one of my favorite cartoons. You don't have this in your book probably because I went ahead and added it myself. But take a minute and read this cartoon on the bottom. The thing on the top is just part of a lab. But read this cartoon on the bottom. This is Little Bobby Tables. Who gets it and can explain to me why that's funny?
His name is Cody.
Yeah. Yeah, his name is actually a SQL command.
Right.
So when they entered it into the database of students, it ran the command and it dropped all the table of students. So, you know, his name, did you really name your son Robert Tick, paren, semicolon, drop table students, semicolon? You know, dash, dash? Yes, I did. Well, thanks a lot. Now we just lost all the students. Well, next time, sanitize your data before you put it in, right? Little Bobby tables, one of my favorites. Client-side attacks. So we got client and server, right? Client-side attacks, nothing specific. So, browser add-ons. Yeah, you got to be careful with that, right? Why? Do you guys use browser add-ons? And if so, what for? What are some typical browser add-ons? Yeah, Google Suite. Yeah, the password. There's a million of them out there. You just got to be careful that if you're going to use a browser add-on that you're getting it from a legitimate source, right? What's that, Java? Yeah, any of that stuff. What are cookies? Cookies are kind of cool. What are cookies? Why do we have cookies? When they're used properly, what's the purpose of a cookie? Yeah, yeah, that's right. It saves you time, and you go to a site, and you know it knows that you've been there. Maybe it knows what's in your shopping cart, stuff like that. That's always good. There was an interesting story. I remember. Now it's very common now that organizations will use encrypted cookies, which is really the way to go because you don't need people manipulating them. Because this actually happened. I don't remember who told me this story, but it's kind of interesting. This, I don't think I need to draw this, but there was a guy who, he had built a website. Now this is when e-commerce was just starting out, so we were not very sophisticated. But this guy built a website and he sold cheese, different types of cheese online. And one of his buddies was, I think, somebody that I knew, and he was a security person. And this cheese shop owner called my buddy and said, hey, you know, if you ever get a chance to check out my website, whatever. He's like, yeah, sure. And the guy just happened to have, the security guy, his mom was having a birthday coming up, and she loved cheese. So he's like, all right, I'm going to go use my buddy's website, and I'm going to order some cheese for my mom, whatever it was. So he goes to the website, and he starts looking around different cheeses, and then he starts putting some cheese into his, basket and all that stuff, and he's got, 5 bricks of cheese, and it's, $50 or whatever it is. Well, I don't remember what happened, but he didn't finish the transaction, got distracted, said, screw it, I'll come back and do it later. He went back to the website like 3 or 4 days later, and when he went to the website, it popped up and said, hey, you've got 5 items in your basket. He's like, How do you know that, right? This, like I said, this is the very beginning of e-commerce. He's like, how would they know that? He did some research and he found out there was a thing called a cookie. So what he did was he went to the cookie folder, he found this cookie file, which was a plain text file. And it said, 5 items times X number of dollars, equals this. He's like, So he changed the price from $10 each to $1 each. Saved the file, refreshed the website, and said, hey, you've got 5 items in here for $5. He's like, oh, sweet. So he wasn't sure if this was really going to work, so it just went from $50 to $5 because he manipulated the cookie. And then he went ahead and kept going through the transaction. It actually did go through. And then he called his buddy and said, Jesus Christ, you got a problem here. And they ended up fixing it. And that's how people can take advantage. Now, the odds of doing that now, probably pretty slim. Most people are much more savvy than that now. But also, now, what's that? Yeah, that's right. But, yeah, look at all the cheese I got from Amazon. But a lot of times now, the servers will actually, number one, they'll have encrypted cookies, but they'll also authenticate the cookie as well to make sure that it's who it's supposed to be. But that's the idea of a cookie. It's supposed to save you time and be a convenience thing, but it can be problems. It's funny, they talk about local shared objects and Flash cookies. Most people have banned Flash. You probably can't even use Flash in your network. I don't know for sure, but I'd be surprised if you're allowed to use Flash. There were so many. It's, nobody programs in Flash anymore anyway, but there were so many vulnerabilities that they just went ahead and just cut it out. So. And then attachments, of course, you have to worry about attachments. There's one that's not in here that I thought that is good too, that I think should be macro attacks. What's a macro? When have you seen macros? Like in what application is it common to see a macro? Yeah, things like Excel. A macro is a little program inside of an application. And sometimes if you have a very complex thing going on in a spreadsheet, you'll create a macro so it's an automated program. And most people will disable macros from running because that's how attackers, they were starting to put in macros. And when you go to open up a spreadsheet, it gives you a warning. It says, there's a macro in here. Do you want to enable it? If you ain't expecting it, the answer is no, right? So macro is another one that you should be aware of. Cross-site scripting. All right. This is usually indicated by XSS. I don't think it's on here. It's not. But the letters XSS. The big thing with cross-site scripting is that when you used to go, websites have changed a lot over the last 20, 25 years, whatever the case may be. When you used to go to like CNN, just an example. If you went to CNN.com 20 years ago, all the content that came up on your browser came from CNN. That doesn't happen anymore now. You go to CNN.com, you have probably 80 different sources of information coming on that first page. There's advertisements galore, there's other feeds and all kinds of other stuff coming in. So it's a patchwork of different sources. So this is where cross-site scripting comes in, because what will happen is you can go to a legitimate page, but that legitimate page can serve up an ad that is malicious and somebody trying to trick you into going to their website. That's what cross-site scripting is. It's that an attacker has put an illegitimate link of some kind into a legitimate page, and you trust it because you trust CNN.com. You don't realize, oh crap, that's an advertisement, somebody else's content, and I probably shouldn't click on it. That's the idea.
CNN.
What's that?
Who would trust?
Right, yeah, Fox, sorry. Yeah, I forgot where I'm at. Yeah. Know your audience. Mm-hmm.
Anywhere you go to, there's always other sites.
Yeah.
So for our website, since we host a lot of them, public web, they never host it on the servers here. They outsource to Akamai and
Yeah.
Amazon AWS to hold their contract. And it puts the emphasis on those providers to
screen that out. Yeah, Akamai is huge in that game. The CDN, Content Delivery Network. If you ever see that acronym, CDN, that's what Akamai does. And They do a lot of caching and all that other stuff to make sure that the relevant content's there when you need it, et cetera. And yeah, you would be transferring risk that way, right?
But they also replicate the data to various data centers worldwide.
Yeah.
So depending on where our audience is hitting the website, the actual content is in a particular theater.
That's right. Yeah, because you don't want to have any more latency than you need to, so you put it out there. It also helps with availability, right? When you think about the CIA triad, that's good. The DOM base, this document object model, I don't know, not really all that sexy. It says script run entirely in the client browser. What happens in a DOM-based cross-site scripting attack is that the content is served up in the local browser from the local machine, and the person doesn't realize it. They think it's coming from somewhere else. But again, you're not probably going to see that anywhere. All right, quick assessment, then we're going to take a break here. All right. All right, you should be able to get this one. Yep. Too much data. And a fixed length buffer. Bad juju. Yeah, and the one I didn't really expound on it though, but XML is a similar thing, right? The extended markup language would also be part database targeting too. I just didn't go into it. Yeah, so the unfiltered semicolons, I didn't give you that, but that is what you would use if you were putting multiple commands together. And what's that? Yeah, stacked query. Yeah, exactly. Is much the same? I don't even like that question. Yeah, it's kind of ugly.
I'm gonna go false.
How do you clean it? Is that just the same as deleting it?
So where do you see clean? Oh, clean by different. Yeah, I don't know. It's Flash. Nobody uses the Flash anymore. It's kind of deprecated. I don't know how you would clean it actually. So it says XSS techniques don't require anything to actually be stored on the target server, which means it's on the client side. So if it's on the client side, that leaves you only the two choices of being the document object model, the local attack version, and something reflective, because again, the reflective, it's not on the server, it's back on the client side. Scripts, it says aren't stored on the server. It should more specifically say are stored locally. So local cross-site scripting, XXS. And I think we got one more. Oh, yeah. You know what? Didn't talk about this, and I do want to talk about it. So see if you guys can answer it, and then I'll go from there. It's the one I didn't talk about. Well, I didn't talk, yeah, the main one. So normal inputs, which, yeah, it's a race condition. So let me explain that. If you haven't heard of a race condition before, pretty cool concept. So you guys have heard of things like, hopefully, identification, authentication, and authorization. And that's the way the process should work. You identify somebody using, I was getting there. You identify somebody first with like a username, you authenticate them with a password, and then you give them permissions, which is the authorization. What are they allowed to do? And that's the way it should work. So identification followed by authentication followed by authorization. Okay? Right? That's the way it should work. But if you could manipulate the system and you could force the program to authorize you before you were authenticated, that would be bad news, right? That's the idea of a race condition, is that you get into the program and you manipulate it so that it goes ahead and gives you part 3 before it does part 2, right? Step 1, step 2, step 3. That's the way it should happen. But if you can manipulate it and have this happen, it's called a race condition. I can give you a real world example though, using, has anybody heard of a company that used to be called WebSense? Yeah, this Force Point now, you may have seen they've changed, they went to Raytheon, they did all some wacky stuff. So I used to be an engineer for WebSense. Anybody know what WebSense does or did? I still specialize in it. It was URL filtering. So WebSense, you guys know checkpoint firewalls? Okay, so checkpoint, yeah, used to because Israeli based. Yeah, yeah, you don't need Gil Schwed and those guys peeking into your network. Yeah, of course. So checkpoint software, checkpoint, we'll talk more about firewalls later, but big firewall companies, still popular, just not within the DoD. But checkpoint firewalls, way back in the day when people really started going to websites, see, the web, the interweb, I love it when I talk to my mother or something, the interweb. Websites really weren't, in the very beginning, very popular because it was all academia, you know, some military stuff, nobody really cared. And then all of a sudden, pornography got on there, and now it's popular, right? That's, I wish I were exaggerating, but I'm not. That's really kind of how the internet became popular. Well, part of the problem was that people were looking at pornography when they were at work. I know, hard to believe. So the checkpoint firewall admins were having to try to go in and blacklist all these different sites. Well, with the speed at which all these sites were coming up, it just wasn't possible. So somebody said, hey, what I'll do is I'm going to create some software, and they ended up calling it WebSense. You know, that wasn't the original name, but WebSense became the company that would filter out those requests. So if you tried to go to Playboy, Penthouse, whatever you happen to be interested in, it would get that URL and filter out because by policy you're not supposed to be going to porn sites. Now, what's interesting though, and how this applies to race conditions, is how that actually work. So here's the interweb, right? And here's a little server. We'll just call this, I don't know, Playboy. Who cares? Call it whatever you want. Can't spell. There we go. Playboy.com. Here's your connection back to firewall. I'm going to draw a little symbol here. I don't know if that symbol means anything to anybody. It's okay if it doesn't. Yeah, it's a switch. So you've basically got the web, and here's this Playboy server up there. You've got a router, your firewall, a switch, and then all your hosts in the network, right? So the way that WebSense would work is that, has anybody heard of something called a span port or a mirror port? Anybody heard of that term before? What's a span port or a mirror port? No idea?
We use it like Gigamon with the mirror port, and we track the traffic, and it doesn't interrupt the users.
That's right. It's a passive way of monitoring traffic, and you can do different things with it. But the way WebSense would work is what you would do is you would create this mirror port or span port on the switch. And essentially what you're telling the switch is, because the switch is connected to the firewall, that's the one point of access in and out of your network. And what you're telling it is, I want to see all the transmit and receive data, TX and RX data. I want to see everything that's going in and out of my network. And you set up a span port, you put it out here, and then you put essentially this is the WebSense box, but it's a sniffer. It's a network sniffer. And so this is WebSense. And so WebSense is monitoring the traffic. So anything that goes in and out has to come through in here and get inspected. So if you send a request for CNN.com, that request is going to get mirrored over to WebSense. WebSense is going to go, CNN.com is under news and media, which is allowed, let it go. Perfectly fine. But if you decide, oh no, I want to do Playboy.com, the Playboy request actually does go out, because this doesn't stop anything. All it does is make a copy. It does go out, and HTTP, it's called HTTP GET request. get request. Okay? It goes out, but it also gets copied here. Now WebSense looks at it and goes, wait a minute, Playboy is under adult material and you're not allowed to do that, so we need to block your ability to do that. Now here's what the cool part is that what WebSense will do is it will craft an what is the number? It's an HTTP, it's not like a 404 or a 505, I forgot what the number is, but it's a response that basically says you can't get to this page, and it shows up a block page, right? But the way it works though is that, you remember the whole SYNAC I told you about? Because that's all gonna occur normally here with CNN or any other website, it doesn't matter. But what WebSense does is it creates a packet and it spoofs itself as the user. So whatever their IP address is, I don't care, 10.10.10.10, whatever. It spoofs itself and says, hey, I'm this person, and by the way, I'm going to do what's called a TCP reset, saying, I don't want your content anymore. And that's the first part, is that it does one thing. So step number one, TCP reset, I don't want to see that. Step number two is to redirect the user to the block page, which is over here. So what it does is it spoofs the IP address now of the Playboy server and says, oh, you want to see naked women? Come over here. But it doesn't send them here, it sends them here to the block page. It says you can't come here. And then it sends the third part, which is an HTTP, a fin, kind of a finalized, close out the session, and says, okay, I'm the Playboy server, here you go, we're done talking now. But it does all of that in microseconds, and it's quite literally, it is a race condition. So that, remember I told you, that request goes out to the Playboy server, but WebSense responds faster than the web server. So now what do you think happens though, if your WebSense server were sitting on a slow WAN link? What might happen? Yeah, Playboy gets there, or you get half a block page and half a naked person, right? We used to call that like a sneak peek. But this was the idea. But it was absolutely a race condition, because if WebSense wasn't able to get back fast enough, they were seeing stuff they shouldn't be seeing. So, long-winded example of a race condition, but it's a real example in real life and something that still works. All right, summary, stuff we talked about. That's not, okay. So now what we're going to do, we're going to take a break. It's like I said, so we're making good time. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you a little bit of an, not terribly extended break, but let's call it, I'm going to give you a little bit of an extended, let's call it 2:30. I'm going to give you 20 minutes. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and pick up another chapter. It's not going to be crypto. I'm going to pick something else. We're going to pick up another chapter. We may or may not get done with it. It doesn't matter. But we're just going to go ahead and get going on it. And that way, it'll make life tomorrow and the next day less painful. So let's do that. Take a break till 2:30. Come back. We'll do another hour. We'll take a short break and then finish up. We'll wrap up at 16:30. So.